Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining this session at Innovation Zero. We're really delighted to be here speaking to a lot of you. Most of you are either policymaker, businesses, or financial professionals. So really appreciated you coming and learning more about the carbon markets, which is certainly an interesting topic. And a lot of you might have seen some of the news lately on talking about the integrity issues that the carbon market have, as well as a lot of the innovation that the carbon markets can play a role in, and especially delighted to be joined today on a panel with two fantastic carbon removal technology companies that are participant in this market. My name is Maria. I'm the co-founder of Abatable. We are a carbon procurement and market intelligence platform helping corporates, predominantly and financial institutions navigate the complexity of the voluntary carbon market. And I'm joined today by Simon Manley, Head of Carbon at Undo, leading organization in the enhanced rock weathering space, and Steve Kelly from 1.5 with a JV between two organizations, one being Occidental Petroleum and the other one being Carbon Engineering, a leading technology firms in the direct air capture storage space. Thank you both for joining. And without further ado, I'll turn to the speaker. The format for today is for both of them to kind of present a little bit more about their company and predominantly touching on how the role of carbon markets can really enable their business in reaching scale and getting us in a journey towards net zero faster. And I'll turn it over to Simon then to kind of walk us through what is enhanced rock weathering. How would you explain that?
Thank you very much indeed. Can everyone hear a huge amount of background noise? Yeah, you can hear me? Okay, fine. So Undo, we're a UK-based project developer specializing in enhanced rock weathering as a means of removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. If I was to describe how enhanced rock weathering works, well, basically it's a reaction between rainwater, carbon dioxide, and certain types of rock. So as rain falls through the air, it picks up carbon dioxide to form a mild acid, and when that rain hits certain types of rocks, silicate rocks, a chemical reaction is enabled. The rock begins to dissolve, releasing calcium and magnesium. And the carbon dioxide that was in the rainwater is formed into a bicarbonate, therefore becoming a lot more stable. Now, that bicarbonate stays in that rainwater, which then eventually becomes soil water, becomes river water, and then eventually ends up in the oceans. And when it gets to the oceans, it is deposited in a solid form, in the form of calcium carbonate, so in forms of shells and rocks, etc. And as such, the carbon dioxide that started its life in the atmosphere is now locked away in solid form in the oceans for hundreds of thousands of years, what we describe as geological sort of time frames. So that's how the process works. Do you want me to talk a little bit about challenges of scaling up the business?
How you use the role of voluntary carbon markets to enable your business. Why do you engage with businesses in having carbon credits be part of your business model?
Okay, so we have basically over the last couple of years been putting in place the building blocks to become a carbon removal credit project developer. We have had to develop a methodology, so using publicly available science for the quantification of carbon removal from enhanced rock weathering baked into a methodology which is conformant with all of the main carbon standards. Secondly, we've had to invest a huge amount into the science. If anybody's done any homework in this area, they'll know that MRV is a challenge for enhanced rock weathering. So we've invested a huge amount into that, using the most up-to-date approaches to put that into our methodology. And then we also have a fantastic operations team who have been building a global supply chain for the rollout of operations across the world to meet our objective of scaling up to enable the removal of 1 million tons of CO2 from the atmosphere by the end of 2024. And so all of those building blocks are currently in place in order for us to generate carbon credits, which we are selling on the voluntary carbon market. And without that carbon revenue, then none of our projects are financially viable.
That's fantastic. And that's what a lot of people refer to additionality, right? The role of carbon credits in enabling a business and making sure that there's an activity that happens that actually removes the
Yeah, there's lots of different flavors to additionality, but the most important one is financial. And yeah, you need to prove that without the carbon revenue, your project would not be viable.
Fantastic, and that's a really key important message for businesses to really engage in this market today, making sure this happens. Over to you, Steve, to talk us a little bit more about 1.5 and how you're commercializing some of the technologies linked to direct air capture and the role of carbon offsets for them.
So thank you, Maria, and thank you to Abatable for the opportunity to speak here today. And good morning to everybody. 1.5 is a wholly owned subsidiary of Oxy's Low Carbon Ventures division. It's an integrated CCUS platform. We think about our offering in three parts. We have a substantial CO2 sequestration business in the United States. So we've set up, so far, we have 5 major CO2 sequestration hubs along the Texas and Louisiana Gulf Coast, where we'll be serving point source capture. We're building relationships with emitters, taking point source captured CO2, transporting it and bringing it to saline aquifers along the Gulf Coast there, providing the environmental attributes that those emitters need to be able to demonstrate that they're abating their emissions. So that's the first part of our business. Then we have our direct air capture business. We are partners with Carbon Engineering, which is a Canadian company. They've actually been removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere since 2015 at pilot scale. And when we set our Low Carbon Ventures division up, we were looking for technologies through the full carbon dioxide value chain. Why? Because our parent company has 5 decades of experience of separating, transporting, and injecting CO2 into reservoirs. So it's a clear skill set that we could bring. Rather than adapting and becoming a renewables provider, we could focus on the carbon management space and address that side of the net zero equation. So we looked at direct air capture technologies that were available, and we selected Carbon Engineering's because we believe that it's the most scalable and the most likely to be able to have the costs brought down to the level that's needed for getting this to being a commodity in the long term. It's a liquid-based process. It's very quick chemistry. We are bringing very large volumes of air into air contactors that are actually repurposed forced draft cooling towers. And instead of contacting the air with water, we're contacting with potassium hydroxide. Potassium hydroxide is alkaline, CO2 in the atmosphere is acidic, they react, they form potassium carbonate, and the rest of the process is a process of, first of all, transferring the carbonate onto calcium by reacting it with calcium hydroxide. We get calcium carbonate pellets, which we then calcine, and we take the pure CO2 stream from the top of the calciner and take that off to be injected into a reservoir for storage. So it's very simple chemistry, but there's a lot of know-how behind it. And what we're engaged in now is, I say, we 1.5 is the worldwide deployment partner for this technology. So they've developed the technology at pilot scale. Our task now is to take that and scale it up to megaton scale, so that we can actually build at climate relevant scale that will help meet the removals targets that are needed to get to net zero. We've actually broken ground on the first megaton scale plant. We began construction late last year. We've just had the groundbreaking ceremony in Texas. That's going to be a first train of a megaton plant, 500,000 tons per annum of CO2 removal, and that will be fully operational by mid-2025. So that's very briefly, that's what we're doing in the direct air capture.
First of all, congratulations on breaking a key milestone. I know these are important not only for you guys as a company, but certainly for the ecosystem as a whole. And one sort of follow-up question there, Simon, perhaps is, can you really explain why you need to engage in the voluntary carbon market with businesses today to make this whole happen?
Yeah, as I say, our focus is in scaling. So we're taking a technology that we know works at pilot scale, And the task for this first-of-a-kind plant that we're building in Texas is to demonstrate that it works at scale as well, with all of the parallel operations and so on that are different from either lab scale or pilot scale. So that's the first thing. And on the sequestration side, I think we're well on top of that. We understand how the molecule behaves in reservoir rock, how it behaves in terms of solution and mineralization in the subsurface. So we're taking care of the technological risk. The risk that we have is the demand side. So it's really important. There are government subsidies available in the U.S. at the moment that gives us access to tax credits for stored CO2 from direct air capture. And that comes to something like $180 a ton. Our cost of capture in these first-of-a-kind plants is something in the region of $400 to $500 a ton. So there's a gap there to close, and that gap can only really be closed by the voluntary market at the moment. So the voluntary market is key to taking away the demand-side risk. We have made great progress on that. We've announced a number of deals to sell credits into the voluntary market. But that's that's the revenue stack that we need to be able to build these first few plants. And once we can demonstrate that there's that pipeline of buyers coming in, then the proliferation of these plants that is needed. And we've announced plans to build 100 of these megaton scale plants by 2035. That still only gets to a small fraction of the removals that are needed to get to net zero by 2050. But it's a big, ambitious plan. To get there, it needs to be financeable. For it to be financeable, it needs to have a revenue stream that's assured.
Yeah, and we're talking a lot about kind of scale and higher costs, and kind of where the voluntary carbon market can plug a hole is really where there's a gap where policy is playing, right? Where policy subsidies have been helpful, but not sufficient for that cost to be really driven down. And when we talk about scale, it's kind of an interesting take from your perspective. You got involved a really large energy group that has a lot of expertise and a lot of capabilities in operating these assets, and they're just using their expertise to this use, which is really interesting. Back to you, Simon. More a question around some of the conversation we have with buyers. A lot of them certainly approach you for the removal component, but certainly what I've appreciated about the enhanced rock weathering process you have in place is that there's actually a lot of other co-benefits of your approach. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. So one of the characteristics of enhanced rock weathering is it shares the same durability, or it locks up carbon dioxide from the atmosphere in the same sort of time frames as so-called engineered solutions, so DAC, for example, and BECCS as well. However, what differentiates it from those engineered solutions is that it also delivers incredibly important co-benefits. Now, those co-benefits mainly center around improving soil health. So as that rock dissolves in the process I described earlier on, it releases macro and micronutrients into the soil: magnesium, calcium, phosphorus, potassium. And all of those things feed the plants, ultimately improving plant health and then hopefully plant productivity as well. So if you were to look at those benefits through the lens of the SDGs, for example, I think it was the UNFCCC only this week highlighted that enhanced rock weathering delivers on SDGs 2, 14, 15, I think it is. So that would be zero hunger, improving looking after the land, looking after the water, and then of course 13, which is climate action. So it's a high durability project type which delivers incredibly important co-benefits, which again can be categorized through the delivery of the SDGs. And that's what's proving incredibly attractive to buyers.
Absolutely. And can you comment a little bit more about price points of some of these solutions, and perhaps have you engaged with policy in a similar way as 1.5 has, or what is kind of the conversation there from your perspective?
We're mainly operating in the UK at the moment. We're expanding into other geographies around the world. But in the UK, there is no government support for enhanced rock weathering at the moment. We haven't quite got over the line. DACs and BECCS seem to be the poster boys of this particular sort of space at the moment, unfortunately. And so in the absence of that support, of course, we have a price point, we have a cost stack, and we're extremely transparent with our customers around sort of what makes that up. It tends to be, it's the rock, it's the haulage, and it's the spreading, and then it's the cost of the MRV on top of that. And so we're extremely transparent about sort of what constitutes that cost stack. Obviously, as we get bigger and we drive economies of scale into the business, then each of those components will come down, and that will be reflected in the pricing.
Reminds a lot of what happened with kind of renewable energy, right? And sort of if you think about development cycles of these solutions, you really need to drive scale to really bring the cost down, and policy can help along the way, but certainly you need a lot of strategic partners that kind of help and support your business. Can you comment a little bit more about some of the strategic partners you've had so far, whether it's from the corporate purchase perspective or more from the
yeah, sure. So, I mean, within our supply chain, we have strategic partners in as much as we have partnerships with quarries to source the rock, and we have partnerships with landowners where that rock is being applied. And that's, as I referred to earlier on, in terms of that's the task of our operations team to build that global supply chain for project scale up. In terms of strategic partners, again, I mean, we don't really, we talk to government, but again, there's not a lot of government support for this particular project type at the moment. So it tends to be within the enterprise sector, and the organizations that we're getting traction with are those of early adopters within the carbon removal space. Last week we announced a big deal with Microsoft, for example. We've sold to Stripe. We're hunting down Frontier. And so all of those organizations they have funds in place to support the scale up and the roll up of this type of technology. And they're all responding very, very well to the progress that we've made and the proposition that we're bringing to them.
It's fantastic to see. And great, there are some early adopters. We need them. Probably more here in the room for sure. Steve, back to you quickly on a question on direct air capture. I think a lot of people kind of can visualize it. It's air that's taken from the air and kind of injected in sort of geological storage. Curious if there's anything that you can comment on how secure this process is. Certainly, it's come in the news that it might not be as safe as what people think. So just in terms of some of the controversies related to this, can you demystify it for us?
I'm not sure I'm going to be able to demystify it, but I think that I understand the sort of the concern, the skepticism, but the concept is really quite simple. I think that the trust building that's required is around how we manage the verification of what we're doing and being completely transparent throughout the full cycle. So as I said at the beginning, we've got 5 decades of experience of injecting CO2 into reservoir rock. So we've got a very deep understanding as a business on the CO2 behavior in reservoir rock. So when it gets injected into a reservoir, you can very confidently predict where the CO2 is going to get trapped. It's going to be stratigraphically trapped with caprock. It's going to be residually trapped where it gets itself into the pore space that previously there may have been a water molecule or an oil or a gas molecule in a depleted reservoir. It's going to be trapped in solution. It's going to dissolve in saline aquifer. And then over years, it will mineralize and form the same kind of rocks that are being formed on the surface as well. So it's a predictable process. Then we drill observation wells in the same reservoir. We drill observations in the sealing layer of rock, so that we can continue to observe over decades as to whether or not there is any leakage. You may have heard of enhanced oil recovery, which is part of the controversy, as I understand it. But what that's given us is a lot of experience over the years of understanding. In fact, CO2 being trapped down there to the business of EOR is a bit of a problem, because it's an expensive commodity, and you're trying to recycle it. And if it stays trapped down there, then that you can't then re-inject it. So we actually know very confidently, based on material balances over decades, of how much of the CO2 and how it gets trapped in the reservoir rock. And then there's concerns around leakage through existing penetrations, existing well bores, and so on. So again, we encourage and we really encourage the, authorities to be clear about what is required from an MRV standpoint to ensure that we're measuring all of those points as well, all of those data points. To ensure there's no leakage through existing penetrations as well.
Yeah, and it seems like a lot of regulatory oversight, especially in the US for a long time, with companies like Occidental.
Which we completely, in fact, I think we encourage, maybe above and beyond the sort of initial, trying to negotiate a sort of minimum due. We think it's really important to build trust with the public, and it's really important to build trust with the buyers, because that's what we believe we're bringing here is a highly durable, permanent storage solution that people can rely on and will be willing to pay for the credits that are associated with that.
Fantastic. I know we're coming up on time. One last question from me. If you have an ask for this audience, which are predominantly businesses and policymakers, what would it be for you, Simon?
You can go first.
I'll go first. So for audience among you, think about your businesses. Get removals into your portfolio. We cannot wait until 2045 to drop the removals piece of the net zero equation into play. We have to be building the technology now so that we can bring the costs down. So be part of that. Put a percentage of your net zero targets as removals. Build intermediate targets, 2030, 2040, for having removals. It doesn't need to be everything, just a percentage of what your targets is, and build that up over time. And for policymakers, yes, there's been, there are hints of support. There's mention of DAC here in the UK and in Europe, but it needs to accelerate. It's falling behind. There are other jurisdictions in the world that are moving forward much more quickly and are going to swallow all of the investment. So if the UK and Europe want to be part of this solution, at least in terms of building the plants, then they need to get moving on the the integration of removals into the ETS and contracts for difference for purchasing credits as well.
So I would echo what Steve has said in terms of talking to enterprises about removals. It's not a tomorrow problem, it's a today problem. And if you treat it as a tomorrow problem, you're going to get a nasty shock when you come to the market looking for credits to hit your net zero targets, because there just won't be any there. So get into it now. From an undo perspective, we're also developing carbon propositions around through different certification pathways to allow for an insetting play, which means that we can play in the decarbonisation space as well as the offsetting space. So please come and talk to us about that. And in terms of, yes, of course, the policymakers, then please don't. It's just way too early to pick winners, and so you need to get fully engaged with all of the different project types that are delivering real carbon removals now and are able to scale, and enhanced rock weathering is certainly one of those. So please pay attention and, again, come and talk to us.
Fantastic. Thank you, everyone. Just if I were to summarize it very quickly, I go back to the concept of green premium, right, that some of you might have heard Bill Gates talk about. It's more expensive solutions today that need support in kind of bringing the cost down, and certainly policy can play a role, but the voluntary carbon market and corporate buyers need to step in as well. Thank you so much. If you want to learn more about Undo 1.5, we'll probably be gathering at the Abatable stand at G30 just at the end of this corridor, so really appreciate it. We have time for questions? Great. Maybe we can take one then.
My name's Luke Morell, and I work with early stage technology companies to commercialize their businesses. So to make sure I've understood this correctly, your business model is to sell carbon credits, correct? Okay. What is the gap between the price that people are prepared to pay today and the price that you need to finance your business? And the second question is, if I want to buy those carbon credits, do I have to today, or can I wait from a legislative point of view? And can you offer me any share of the business, or are you just selling carbon credits? So maybe 3 questions there. Thank you.
If you want an equity stake, speak to my CFO. If you want carbon credits, you should buy them now, not later. And I'm afraid I forgot the first question. What was it again? Was the price? Right, okay, so closing that, I mean, that's going to come with economies of scale. I think in this market in particular, pricing is kind of all over the place because it's so early. Project developers are only just getting going, so prices are relatively high, but I think it will eventually settle down as economies of scale come into these businesses. And if we're going to get anywhere near the compliance markets, which I think we truly need to do from a sort of regulatory perspective, then that price point needs to come down to something which is on a level with, let's say, the ETS, so around €100 or $100 per ton. DAX is a long way from that. Enhanced rock weathering is a lot closer. So.
Similar answer. We're at, in terms of what people are prepared to pay, we are announcing deals. We've sold 400,000 tons of credits to Airbus. A couple of weeks ago, there was the announcement of the next gen deal where a number of buyers have pooled together to buy credits from from multiple sources, including from 1.5. So the appetite is there for for these kind of volumes. I mentioned the sort of the gap where our cost of capture is we've published it between $400 and $500 per ton. Financing for that or funding for that in the revenue stack comes from $180 per ton as a tax credit for 12 years. So spread that over the life of the plant, and then that gives you the target that we're looking for in these first of a kind plants. We have line of sight. We work closely with the technology team in carbon engineering, and we can see a line of sight to bringing that cost down progressively to around $250 per ton, and then down to around $125 per ton during that deployment process. Because the technology doesn't stand still. There are lots of competing technologies out there. We think this is the engineered removal that's the most scalable at the moment, and we're trying to demonstrate that. But the technology won't stand still. The process simplification, steps that are needed to bring that cost down are already being worked, and we think we can see a clear line of sight to $125 a ton.
Maybe. Okay. All good. Thank you. Really appreciate it. We'll wrap it up here. But as I said, come and join us at G30.